They say the past never truly dies. It lingers like smoke trapped in stone walls, waiting for the right soul to draw it out again. And in 1891, that soul arrived in the form of a young historian named Eleanor Whitcomb. She was only 26, yet her name already whispered through the academic halls of Cambridge. Unlike others who chased safe and comfortable research, Eleanor was drawn to the margins of history, the forbidden corners that polite society avoided. Her fascination was not with kings or wars, but with families who had vanished, bloodlines that ended not through natural decline but through whispers of the unnatural. It was this obsession that led her north to Darnwick, a village half swallowed by moorland fog, where roofs sagged under centuries of rain and the graveyard stones leaned like broken teeth. The people there lived in suspicion of strangers, but most of all they lived in the shadow of one name, Ashford. For generations, the Ashford clan ruled the moors with iron and indulgence. They were known for their vast estate, Ashford Hall, perched high on the cliffs like a sentinel, overlooking both land and sea. Their fortune was said to be endless: wool, coal, ships, even land across the channel. But fortune, as the villagers muttered, did not explain everything. Some swore they never saw the Ashfords' age, at least not in ways ordinary folk did. Others spoke of midnight gatherings at the chapel ruin, where prayers were not lifted to God, but to something older. By Eleanor's time, Ashford Hall was a ruin. Its windows were blind, its gates rusted, its gardens strangled with thorn. The family line had thinned into whispers, but their legend, their curse, remained. Eleanor carried with her a battered trunk filled with notes and fragile documents. Among them were letters she had obtained from London auction houses, correspondence between Lord Ashford himself and descendants whose names had been deliberately scratched out. The ink was faded, the paper brittle, but the words were clear enough to stir her blood, a pact, never fully described, written in language that wavered between legal oath and ritual. Her first days in Darnwick were marked not by discovery, but by hostility. The villagers stared when she walked through the crooked lanes. The innkeeper, a gaunt man with coal-dust skin, served her bread without a word and took her coin as if it burned him. And when Eleanor asked questions about the Ashfords, silence closed around her like a coffin. It was only the widow, old Mrs. Turn, her shawl pulled tight and her voice a rasp of wind, who dared speak. She leaned close to Eleanor outside the churchyard and whispered, "It weren't war, miss, it weren't hunger. What took the Ashfords they called on themselves, and it's still here, watching." Eleanor, trained to dismiss superstition, told herself it was folklore, the residue of gossip hardened into myth. But even so, she felt it, that sense of eyes upon her just beyond the fog. That weight of history, heavy enough to break bones. On the fourth evening, lantern in hand, she walked the muddy path to the iron gates of Ashford Hall. They groaned as she pushed them open, as if warning her to turn back. The gravel crunched beneath her boots, and the ruined estate loomed before her. Its great front doors were chained, but one panel hung loose, splintered decades ago. Inside, the air was colder than the night itself. Cobwebs shimmered in the lantern light. A staircase curved upward into darkness, its banister carved with twisting vines now eroded into grotesque shapes. Portraits stared from the walls, their faces blistered by mildew. Lord Ashford's painted eyes followed her wherever she moved. But it was the silence that struck her most. Not the stillness of abandonment, but the silence of listening, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Eleanor laid her notes on a dust-covered table. From her trunk she withdrew one of the letters. The handwriting was elegant, curling. The price is agreed. The bloodline must endure. All that is owed will be repaid in kind. The signature beneath had been torn away centuries ago. A draft crept through the broken shutters, her lantern guttered, and in that brief flicker of shadow, she thought she saw movement not outside but within the hall, a figure, half-formed in the gloom, vanishing before her eyes could confirm it. She told herself it was her imagination, the product of fatigue and fear. But as she gathered her papers, she noticed something chilling. Though the hall had stood abandoned for decades, there were fresh footprints in the dust. Not hers. Larger, heavier, leading deeper into the ruin. Her breath caught. She raised her lantern and followed. Each step echoed as if mocking her courage. The prince descended into the cellar. At the top of the stair she hesitated. The air smelled of damp stone and something sharper, metallic, blood. She forced herself down, one step at a time, until her lantern revealed the cellar floor. There, half buried in rubble, was a chest iron-bound, its lock broken long ago, and within she found documents torn and stained, but unmistakably Ashford, birth records, death notices. Letters never meant to leave this place, and one sheet in particular, wrapped in oilcloth as though preserved with care. A pledge, written in Latin, sealed with crimson wax that had never lost its color. It spoke of the debt of flesh, binding not only Lord Ashford, but every generation to follow. The wax shimmered as her lantern light touched it, and for the first time Eleanor felt not the thrill of discovery, but the terror of trespass. This was no history. This was warning. She pressed the paper back into the chest and staggered from the cellar, heart pounding. As she emerged into the night, the fog had thickened. The gates creaked shut behind her without her touch. And though the village was a mile away, she heard whispers carrying through the mist, low, rhythmic, like a chant. Words she could not decipher, yet felt echoing in her bones. The Ashford legacy had found her, and it was only the beginning. If you uncovered a letter hinting that an entire bloodline had bargained with something beyond human comprehension, would you keep digging, or would you burn it before it burned you? And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe. The next part is even more terrifying. The deeper Eleanor walked into Ashford Hall, the more it seemed the building itself wanted to be remembered. Her journal, once reserved for tidy academic notes, became something darker, a vessel for the strangeness that clung to the house like damp to stone. By daylight, the ruin revealed its scars. The walls were not merely crumbling with age. They bore scratches long and violent, like talons dragged through plaster. The great hall, once the pride of the Ashfords, was a gallery of defacement. Portraits that should have immortalized the family's grandeur were slashed beyond recognition. Faces had been gouged out, not by vandals seeking plunder, but with precision, as though the very identities of the Ashfords were being erased by themselves or by something within their blood. The architecture itself seemed wrong. Doorways did not align with their frames. Corridors curved into impossible angles. Staircases doubled back as though deliberately designed to confuse. Eleanor recorded each detail, noting how the house seemed to shift the longer she studied it. But it was in a dust-choked chamber above the east wing that she found the first true relic, a diary. The leather binding had cracked, its edges gnawed by mold, but the handwriting inside was young, slanted, and frantic. It belonged to Isolde Ashford, the youngest daughter of Lord Ashford. At first her entries were innocent, recounting afternoons spent in the rose gardens and the gatherings of noble visitors, but within a handful of pages the words curdled. She wrote of voices in the stone, of corridors that whispered to her when she walked alone, of sermons her father gave not in the chapel, but in a locked room in the cellar. His Bible, she wrote, grew heavier with each passing night, its words bent, twisted into prayers that no longer belonged to God. Her final entries were barely legible, the ink smeared, the script breaking into jagged strokes. They live beneath. They call in sleep. Father says we are chosen, but chosen for what? Eleanor closed the diary, her hands trembling. For the first time her scholarly pursuit began to feel like desecration. That night she remained within the hole, lantern light spilling across warped floorboards as she tried to decipher the Ashford curse. The wind howled against broken windows, and the timbers groaned. She told herself it was nothing more than the weather, but her ears caught something else, footsteps, light and deliberate, moving across the upper corridor. She froze. Then came the faint sound of sobbing, a child's cry, high, thin, filled with grief. Her lantern quivered in her grip. She called out once, her voice hollow in the cavernous ruin. There was no reply. Only silence. A silence so deep it felt intentional, as though the house had swallowed the sound whole. Sleep came poorly, and when it did, it was filled with shadows pressing in from all sides. In her dreams, portraits turned to watch her. The faces she had seen scratched away returned, their features smeared, their mouths whispering words she could not grasp. By morning, she resolved to return to the cellar. The footprints she had seen on her first visit still lingered in the dust, leading her down into the bowels of the house. And there, behind a collapsed wall, she uncovered something older than the hall itself. A stone slab, carved not with crosses or runes, but with symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. Interwoven circles, figures half human, half beast, shapes that suggested binding, sacrifice, covenant. It was not Christian, it was not pagan, it was something in between. Something the villagers had likely never dared name. Her notes from that day grew erratic. "This is not ritual," she scrawled. "This is transaction." The cellar air was colder than the grave. Her lantern flickered though no draught stirred, and for the briefest instant she swore the carvings pulsed, as though something beneath the stone still lived. When she returned to the village, her appearance startled even the hardened locals. Her cheeks were pale, her hands shaking, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. At the inn, Mrs. Turn caught her arm. "You've been touched," the widow hissed. "The hall don't wake unless someone calls it, and you've called it." Others echoed the warning. Some refused to serve her food. Children crossed themselves as she passed. But Eleanor was deaf to their pleas. Her obsession had taken root. Every letter, every diary, every artifact drew her deeper. She no longer saw herself as a mere historian. She was a witness, chosen to piece together a puzzle that no one else dared approach. What she did not yet realize was that the puzzle was piecing itself around her, that every word she read, every line she copied, was a kind of prayer, and the Ashfords, long dead, were listening. That night, the house answered. The sobbing returned, louder now, echoing down stairwells. The footsteps became a steady tread, pacing as though someone watched her from just beyond the lantern's reach. Her journal entries grew frantic, her once clear script unraveling into jagged scrawl. At the stroke of midnight, she awoke to the sound of chains dragging across the floorboards above her. She raced upstairs, lantern raised, only to find nothing but empty corridors and a portrait fallen from the wall. The canvas was blank. The paint, the face, it was gone, as though it had never been there at all. And when she returned to her bedroll, she found something laid neatly atop her open journal, a single page torn from Isolde's diary, one she had not seen before. The ink was still wet. It read, "We are not gone. You have made us remember, and now we will make you." The lantern sputtered, then went out. The Ashfords were not destroyed in a single moment. Their ruin was centuries in the making, an inheritance of sin passed from father to child, sealed in silence, erased from memory. And through the trembling pages of Isolde's diary, Eleanor Whitcomb uncovered where it all began. The name was Ambrose Ashford. Lord of the manor in the mid-1600s, he rose during a time of famine and plague, when villages around Darnwick starved and the moors themselves seemed cursed with blight. Yet the Ashfords prospered, their coffers overflowed, their livestock never sickened, their fields bloomed while others rotted. The diary spoke of his sermons, though not the kind offered in any church. Ambrose had built his own chamber for worship, one lined not with crosses but with stone and sigil. The family gathered in secret. The servants were forbidden entry. and from that hidden chamber emerged wealth, feasts, and power. But Isolde's account was not history, it was confession. She wrote of whispers passed down through generations that Ambrose had not simply prayed, he had pledged. The words she transcribed chilled Eleanor to the bone. He bound us to prosperity by covenant of blood. One child, each generation shall be given, not slain, not buried, but consumed. Their essence feeds the pact. Their silence sustains us. Eleanor set the diary aside, her hands trembling. This was not mere superstition. The Ashfords' prosperity had been bought, not earned, and the price had always been children. She began to trace the genealogy, birth records from parish archives, scattered wills, fragments of correspondence. The deeper she looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Entire names missing from official registers. In portraits, the Ashford family posed proudly, but gaps remained, awkward spaces where a figure had once stood, later painted over with curtain or column. Each generation had a child who simply vanished. No death date, no burial, no trace. The silence of the village now made sense. For centuries they had watched the Ashfords thrive while their own children withered in plague and hunger, and they had seen children of the manor disappear, one by one, into a debt no human hand should ever have signed. When Eleanor pressed for answers, the villagers turned cold. At the inn, the black-eyed innkeeper slammed her journal shut and told her to leave the past buried. An old farmer spat at her feet, muttering that the land itself had been poisoned. Mrs. Turn, her voice shaking, whispered only this: "The Moors drank the blood. That's why nothing grows clean. That's why the fog never lifts." But Eleanor was deaf to their fear. For the first time she felt she was on the brink of a revelation that could shatter history. A sin so profound it had rewritten the soil itself. That night, exhaustion overcame her. She lay in the hall's east chamber, the diary at her side, her lantern burning low, but sleep brought no peace. She dreamed of the moors in fire. The peat marshes burned like oil, their smoke choking the sky. From the flames rose the cries of children, thin, echoing voices that pleaded from the darkness, and among them stood a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, its eyes hollow, its hand extended, a hand that seemed to reach for her through the dream, whispering without sound, "Come." Eleanor woke with a start, her skin slick with sweat, her throat raw, as if she had been screaming. The lantern was cold beside her, extinguished, though she swore she had left it burning. And for the first time since arriving at Ashford Hall, fear pressed against her fascination. Fear that the whispers in Isolde's diary were not metaphor. Fear that the covenant Ambrose Ashford had bound was not broken, but waiting. Yet even as dread gnawed at her resolve, obsession bound her tighter. She could not leave. Not yet. Not when the truth lay within reach. She vowed that she would uncover every sin the Ashfords had buried, every child erased, every bargain struck. But the house, as if pleased with her vow, answered. From the corridor outside her chamber came the sound of a single knock, slow, deliberate, followed by silence. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only the portraits stared back, faces gouged away, their blankness somehow smiling. The covenant was awake. History is never neutral. It bleeds, it stains, and the more Eleanor pressed her pen against the page, the more Ashford Hall seemed to press back. Her body, once full of restless energy, began to betray her. First came the nosebleeds, thin rivulets staining her journal pages crimson. Then the trembling, her hands quivering as though guided by another's will. And at night, the visions, shapes flickering at the edge of her lantern light. Voices murmuring from the walls, not the faint echoes of memory, but words sharp enough to cut into her thoughts. She tried to dismiss it as fatigue, the result of inhaling centuries of dust and mold, but the pattern was undeniable. The more she read Isolde's diary, the worse it became. It was as though the girl's torment had seeped into the paper itself, and now into Eleanor's mind. The diary told of horrors too intimate to dismiss as invention. Isolde's brothers, Thomas, Richard, vanished from their beds in the dead of night. Their places at the table remained empty. Their portraits removed, yet their absence was met with silence. Her mother turned away when Isolde begged for answers, and her father, Lord Ashford himself, preached not scripture but madness. His sermons bent toward the promise of eternity, of a family lifted above plague and famine, sanctified not by God but by covenant. Isolde's writing grew more frantic with each page. "They come in the night," she scrawled. "I hear them in the stones. The walls breathe, the house eats. I will be the last." That phrase lodged in Eleanor's chest. I will be the last. When she carried her questions into the village, the reactions confirmed her dread. The butcher spat and crossed himself. The innkeeper slammed his shutters closed. Only Mrs. Turn, her shawl drawn tight, offered an answer. She was the last. The girl lived alone when the rest were gone, but how she died, none agree. Some say the marsh swallowed her, others say the house kept her, but none saw her buried. The thought gnawed at Eleanor. If Isolde was the last Ashford, why had her fate been scrubbed from record? And why did Eleanor feel the girl's despair pressing against her bones, as though her words had never ended but continued through Eleanor's own hand? One evening, guided by both dread and compulsion, Eleanor prowled deeper into the hall. Behind a rotted tapestry, she found a door, locked, rust-eaten through the iron, but firm enough to resist her. She pressed, pulled, even struck it with a lantern pole until the wood cracked. The door gave way with a scream of splinters. The air that spilled out was suffocating, thick, heavy with a stench that had no right to linger after centuries, iron and rot, as if blood still clung to the stone. Her lantern illuminated a room small and square. Along its walls, lined in careful rows, were coffins, dozens of them, child-sized. Their lids bore carvings, the Ashford crest etched into each with cold precision. Dust shrouded the wood, but the symbols were unmistakable. Eleanor staggered forward, choking on the air. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid of one coffin. Inside, curled small as though in prayer, lay the skeletal remains of a child. Fragile bones, untouched by decay, yet stripped of life. Her vision swam. She opened another, and another, each the same, coffins of children, laid out not in honor, but in tribute, offerings to a covenant written in flesh. The lantern flame guttered, and in the silence whispers rose, not faint, not imagined, clear, intimate. They called her name. Eleanor. Her knees buckled. She collapsed against the stone floor, clutching her ears though the voices came from within. The coffins seemed to shift in her vision, the skeletal faces turning toward her, empty sockets wide with accusation or recognition. She scrambled to her feet, gasping. Rational thought battled with terror. Perhaps the coffins were plague victims, hidden away by a family terrified of scandal. Perhaps the whispers were no more than a mind breaking under strain, but even as she clung to logic, a deeper truth gnawed at her. Her blood felt strange, hot, restless. It surged in her veins as though stirred by something ancient, something answering the house. She pressed her hand to her chest, trembling. And in that moment, the suspicion formed, terrible, unshakable. What if her obsession with the Ashfords was not mere scholarship? What if her connection to them was more than academic? As she staggered from the chamber, the whispers did not follow. They receded, satisfied, almost welcoming. Ashford Hall had accepted her, and Eleanor Whitcomb could no longer deny the truth. She was no longer just uncovering the Ashfords' bloodline, she was becoming part of it. The diary's final pages bleed with desperation. Isolde's hand grew frantic. The ink spattered, words etched with a trembling defiance. She had written of her refusal to be given over, of her plan to break the covenant by denying her blood to the Moors. She vowed that her own suffering would not feed the pact, that if she vanished, if she defied them, the chain would snap. Yet her last entry ends abruptly, the quill stroke torn into the parchment, as though someone had ripped it from her hand before the words were finished. Eleanor feels the words sear into her veins. Restless, she digs deeper into parish records, tracing the names with a growing sense of dread. Then she finds it, her grandmother's maiden name, Ashford. The revelation crushes her. She had thought herself a witness to history, a scholar piecing together a dead family's secrets. But the truth is merciless. She has always belonged to the story. The Moors did not lure her as a stranger. They called her home. Her breath catches as the hall answers her discovery. Doors slam in unison like a gavel passed down by unseen hands. Her notes scatter across the floor, pages torn and flung into the air as though a storm raged inside the walls. The corridors groan, the wood beneath her feet swells and pulses as if veins run beneath the floorboards. The whispers surge into voices layered, overlapping, each one a shade of the children erased from portraits and coffins. They chant her name, binding her in syllables that feel older than scripture. Eleanor clutches her chest, but the beat of her heart is no longer hers. It belongs to the house. She staggers to the mirror in the chamber and sees it etched upon her skin, a faint crimson mark blooming across her collarbone. The sigil of the Ashfords. The mark of Isolde. Eleanor's last certainty collapses. She is not a chronicler of their sins. She is the Covenant's inheritance. The storm breaks the night Eleanor uncovers the chapel's foundations. The villagers had long whispered of it being swallowed by the earth, but beneath the blackened stones she finds a stairwell choked with moss and soil. Lantern in hand, she descends into a hollow where air hangs thick as grave dust. The chamber is no sanctuary. It is a prison of worship. At its center lies a block of ancient stone, its surface etched with blood sigils that have not faded despite centuries. Rusted chains coil at its base, their iron still glinting faintly, as if slick with unseen damp. Around it lie shards of bone and fragments of ritual tools, daggers, chalices, and scorched scripture, written in a tongue Eleanor cannot name. Among the debris, she discovers brittle papers preserved in wax. They recount Ambrose Ashford's ambition, his covenant with a nameless presence that dwelled beneath the marshes. In return for eternal dominion over his bloodline, Ambrose pledged flesh, one child each generation, given not to death but to consumption, their essence dissolved into the pact. The covenant promised prosperity, yet it was hunger disguised as blessing. As Eleanor reads, her pulse hammers with a dreadful clarity. The covenant was never ended. Isolde's rebellion did not break it, but poisoned its terms. Her refusal left the pact unfulfilled. The Ashford line did not escape. It collapsed inward, devoured by the very entity they once fed. Their bodies rotted, but their souls remained shackled here, bound to the stone, whispering in the walls of the hall. And now through Eleanor the silence must be answered. She feels it in her marrow, in the mark that burns faintly at her collarbone. The covenant recognizes her blood. The chamber shudders, dust rains from the ceiling. Eleanor staggers back as the sigils on the stone pulse with dull red light, like a heart beginning to beat after centuries of dormancy. The voices rise, no longer whispers but demands, intoning a truth she cannot deny. The pact has come for her. The nights grow longer, though the calendar insists it is spring. The air within Ashford Hall no longer smells of damp timber and mildew, but of something metallic, something like the tang of iron left too long upon the tongue. Eleanor notes in her journal that her candle seems to gutter sooner, her lamp oil drained faster than expected, as though the house itself drinks light to sustain its hunger. It begins subtly, with movement glimpsed in her periphery. A curtain sways though the window is closed. Dust shifts across the corridor though her steps are still. She tells herself it is exhaustion, that her mind frays under the weight of sleepless nights and the revelations of Ambrose's covenant. But when she finally dares lift her lantern into the shadows, she sees them children, dozens of them drifting like smoke within the halls. They are pale, almost colorless, their faces blanched of life, and yet their eyes are darker than coal, hollow sockets that seem to draw her in like wells with no bottom. Their lips do not always move, yet their voices fill the corridor in soft unison, whispering prayers not unlike those she read in the brittle scripture below the chapel. The cadence is fractured, childlike, their pleas circling in repetition, "Release us, release us, release us." Eleanor stumbles back, pressing her hand to the cold wall, her breath tearing ragged in her throat. She knows instinctively who they are. The covenants taken, the children swallowed by Ambrose's pact, erased from portraits, from records, from memory itself. Yet here they are, preserved not as lives but as echoes, bound to the hall like candle smoke trapped in glass. One child steps closer, a boy no older than 10. His hair falls in damp curls across his forehead, a faded ribbon tied to hold it back. Once red, now so bleached it looks the color of old bone. He does not speak at first, but when he lifts his hand toward Eleanor, she feels a chill seep into her bones as though he touches her already. His lips part, and the word he breathes shatters her composure. "Sister." The sound rings inside her, like a bell struck deep underground. She jerks her hand back, but he follows, fingers curling to clasp her wrist. His skin is insubstantial yet heavy as frost, and when she looks into the hollow of his eyes, she sees not emptiness, but the reflection of herself, pale, trembling, her veins laced with shadow. "No," she whispers, shaking her head, but the child only repeats the word, louder now, joined by others. One girl with plaited hair, another with a missing tooth, a babe barely able to walk, each with the Ashford crest etched faintly across their spectral skin, like a brand left by the Covenant's claim. They gather around her in a tightening circle, chanting "Sister, sister, sister," until it becomes a dirge. Eleanor tears free and flees down the corridor, but the house offers no escape. Every door she opens leads back into the hall. Every staircase spirals endlessly until she finds herself at the same landing. She bursts out through the heavy oak doors into the night, her lungs aching for the sharp air of the moors. But the moors have turned against her. The marshland stretches on forever, its reeds hissing in the wind like a congregation at prayer. She runs until her legs buckle, yet every path returns her to the hall. Its silhouette looms, windows glowing with faint light, though she swore no fire burns within. The sky above is cloudless, yet not a star can be seen, only a ceiling of black pressing down. She collapses upon the wet grass, nails digging into the soil. "Let me go," she screams into the wind, her voice ragged, raw. The earth beneath her trembles faintly, as if acknowledging her plea but offers no mercy. From afar she hears the toll of the chapel bell, though it has not hung in decades. She lifts her gaze to see the villagers gathered on the ridges of the moor, lanterns swaying in their hands. They stand like mourners at a grave, whispering among themselves, their faces turned toward the hall. None dare step closer. "They know," Eleanor mutters through her teeth, fury lacing her fear. They always knew. She can see their lips moving, can hear the faint cadence of their murmurs carried on the wind. The curse has found its last heir. Her heart twists. She understands now why the villagers kept their silence, why they urged her to leave when her pallor grew. They had known her name. They had known her blood. She was not a scholar who came to study the ruin. She was the ruin itself, resurrected in flesh. The children return to her side. Their forms drift from the moor like mist, circling her, their hollow eyes fixed upon her with unnatural hunger. The boy with the ribbon kneels, placing his translucent hand upon her shoulder. His touch burns with cold, yet carries a strange tenderness. "You can end it," he whispers, though his lips do not move. The words shiver directly into her skull. "Or you can feed it." The choice coils within her like a blade pressed against the skin. She realizes then that the covenant does not merely demand, it tempts. Every Ashford before her yielded not only from fear but from desire to preserve the bloodline, to maintain prosperity, to escape ruin. It is not simply a curse, but a bargain. But what can she give? She is no mother to offer a child, no patriarch with heirs to sacrifice. She is the last. And if the last fails, what will the covenant consume instead? A sudden wind tears across the moor, carrying the sound of weeping. Eleanor clasps her ears, but it is not the children, it is the hall itself, groaning like a body roused from slumber. The stone trembles beneath her feet, the marsh bubbles as though something beneath begins to stir. She stumbles backward toward the great oak doors, knowing now she cannot flee. The world has narrowed to Ashford Hall alone, and she is its unwilling center. The villagers extinguish their lanterns one by one, until the moor is left in darkness. Their silhouettes vanish into the fog, abandoning her to the inheritance she cannot cast aside. The house waits. The children wait. The covenant breathes through the soil, through the walls, through her very veins. And Eleanor, shaking, broken, whispers into the night, "What do you want of me?" The answer comes not from the boy, nor from the hall, but from her own mouth, as if spoken by another voice lodged within her throat. Blood. Always blood. The air within Ashford Hall has grown heavy, suffocating, as though centuries of secrets have thickened it into something almost solid. Eleanor moves through its corridors with the slow tread of one half dreaming, half dying. Her once steady hands tremble now, blotting her journal with smears of ink, words jagged and frantic. The line between historian and heir has blurred. Every discovery bleeds into her veins as if carved upon her own flesh. It begins with whispers carried through the cracked plaster. At first she thought of them as children still, those pale figures who had begged for her release. But these voices are older, darker, weighted with intent. They speak not of mercy, but of demand. Their chant is relentless, and though she cannot always discern the words, one phrase cuts through clearly, over and over again: blood demands blood. Eleanor finds herself pacing the library in desperation, pulling down volumes not of her own but left by the Ashfords themselves. Sermons twisted into heresies, genealogies half-burned, even fragments of letters penned by Ambrose's descendants. The story they tell is not one of piety but of corruption, of a family line that, when unwilling to give its children, sought loopholes in blood. One journal, brittle with age, speaks of servants gone missing. Another letter to a parish priest, unsigned but unmistakably Ashford, asks whether a cousin twice removed might suffice as offering. Eleanor's stomach turns as she reads the cold arithmetic of flesh, the calculated desperation of a house bargaining with an unyielding power. They sacrificed outsiders, vagrants, even villagers dragged from the moors, yet the covenant rejected them all. For when Ambrose Ashford struck his pact, it was not with land nor with wealth, but with lineage itself. The covenant would accept only Ashford blood. All else was worthless, discarded like ash upon the wind. And when the family attempted deceit, the house itself exacted punishment. Entire wings crumbled in the night. Fires consumed bedchambers, while those within screamed. Their names were struck from record, their lineages marked with sudden breaks. The estate devoured its own. Eleanor presses the heel of her palm to her temple, as though she could rub out the knowledge before it consumes her. Yet it is too late. She has already seen her face in the glass. The first time she dismissed it as fatigue. A cracked mirror in the upstairs hall had caught her reflection strangely, splitting her features with a jagged seam. But each time she returned, the distortion worsened. Her hair fell in the same plaited braid she remembered from Isolde's faded portraits, though she had not bound it so herself. The arch of her brow, the shape of her mouth, it was not her own face but Isolde superimposed upon her. Tonight when she leans close to the mirror, she no longer sees Eleanor at all. She sees Isolde, eyes wide with defiance, lips parted in a scream that Eleanor herself cannot hear. She stumbles back, knocking over a chair, heart hammering against her ribs. The house is not simply showing her history, it is rewriting her body to fit the role. When she closes her eyes at last, exhaustion dragging her into sleep, she dreams of her grandmother. The woman had been distant in life, veiled in silence about the past. But here in the dream, her voice is clear, sharp as broken glass. "You cannot deny it," she whispers, hands clutching Eleanor Esper's shoulders with unnatural strength. "The blood remembers. Deads cannot be buried. They will find you, child. They always find you." Eleanor wakes gasping, sweat dampening her skin, though the air is cold. She scribbles furiously in her journal, trying to anchor herself to reason, but her words fracture into repetition. Blood demands blood. Blood demands blood. Every step through the hall confirms what she has begun to dread, that she has no true choice at all. The Covenant is not a story she can uncover and archive. It is alive, thrumming beneath the stone, pulsing through the walls like a second heartbeat. And it beats her. The children reappear at her door, their hollow eyes reflecting the candlelight like black mirrors. They no longer beg. They watch. They wait. In desperation, Eleanor descends into the cellar once more, returning to the altar-like stone she had discovered before. The carvings writhe in the lantern's glow, not merely marks upon stone, but sigils that seem to shift as her eyes pass over them. Her hands tremble as she traces them, half repelled, half compelled. And then she sees it, a groove, down the center of the stone, shallow yet deliberate, as though shaped to receive something liquid. The shape of a channel, a vessel, a place where blood was meant to run. The truth presses upon her chest like a weight. This stone is the mouth of the Covenant, and it has been thirsty for centuries. She collapses beside it, whispering into the damp air. "Why me?" The question shatters into sobs. Why must it be me? The answer comes not in words, but in sensation. The hall shudders above her, dust raining from the beams. The altar pulses faintly beneath her palms, as though veins run through it still. She feels the echo of every Ashford before her, those who yielded, those who resisted, those who were taken despite their pleas. Their choices echo within her blood, and she knows that she stands at the same precipice. To refuse is not freedom. To refuse is annihilation. And yet to give herself willingly would not be martyrdom but surrender, feeding the hunger that has devoured generations. The mirrors upstairs had shown Isolde's face, but in the stone's reflection she saw something worse. Her own hollowed, her eyes blackened, her mouth stained red as though she had already made the offering. She staggers back, pressing herself against the cellar wall. Her mind whirls between two impossible paths. One demands her blood, the other demands her defiance. Both, she fears, end in ruin. The house groans around her, timbers creaking like a body stretching after centuries of slumber. She feels it closing in, the walls pulsing as though alive. In the silence that follows, she hears it again, clear and undeniable. Blood demands blood. The words chase her up the cellar steps, echoing through every corridor, every mirror, every dream. She cannot escape them. And so Eleanor writes one final note in her journal before the candlelight sputters out. "I am the last. I am debt unpaid. Either I feed the Covenant, or I end it. There is no third path." The ink blots where her hand falters. The hall is silent. But somewhere faintly she hears the cry of a child. And then another, and another, until it is a chorus, rising, surrounding her, filling every shadow of Ashford Hall. The hour has come. Eleanor Whitcomb, once a scholar, now a hollow vessel of obsession, stands at the center of Ashford Hall's decay. Her journal, torn and blackened with frantic entries, lies open upon the altar stone. Around her, the remnants of centuries are spread, fragments of letters, rusted ritual knives, a chalice lined with corrosion, the covenant stone itself slick with the memory of blood. The walls pulse as if aware, as if waiting. She has decided tonight, the Ashford line ends. With trembling hands, she gathers lamp oil into brass canisters, carrying them one by one through the corridors of the hall. Her lantern light catches upon portraits defaced long ago, their hollow eyes now seeming to follow her with renewed hunger. Every corridor groans beneath her steps, as though the house resents her defiance. But she presses on. The children are first to arrive. Pale, translucent, they seep through walls and stairwells like mist. Their hollow sockets glimmer faintly in the firelight as they encircle her, whispering her name in fragile tones. Eleanor, Eleanor. The sound is not malicious. It is pleading. Their hands reach toward her, small fingers brushing the hem of her dress, their touch as cold as frost upon bone. They do not want her destruction. They want her to choose release. But Eleanor cannot be both savior and sacrifice. Her blood is demanded, yet she refuses to yield. The cellar groans beneath her feet. And then the air shifts. From the dark corner where the stone altar rests, something stirs. It rises like smoke, condensed into flesh. A towering shadow scraping the ceiling. Its form is not fixed. It writhes as if composed of many figures bound into one mass. Its voice is worse. Not one tone but hundreds layered upon one another, whispering, screaming, chanting. You are ours. The words rumble through the foundation, shaking dust from the rafters. The entity, the nameless covenant Ambrose Ashford once called forth, has awakened in full. It is no longer a phantom memory. It is here, in the flesh of shadow. Eleanor grips her lantern, forcing her voice to remain steady though her knees weaken. I am not yours. I am the last. And with me, this ends. The shadow bends toward her, its vast face splitting into 100 mouths. From them pour the voices of every Ashford who came before, crying, pleading, commanding. She sees Ambrose among them, his hollow eyes burning with pride and rage. She sees Isolde, her ancestor, screaming in silent defiance. Their souls are woven into the shadow, consumed by the covenant, and now they speak as one. Your blood binds us. Deny it, and you are consumed. The children wail. The hall trembles, and Eleanor knows the house itself will not let her flee. She cannot outrun this inheritance. She can only destroy it. Her hands shake as she lifts the lantern high. She hurls it against the corridor wall, where oil has soaked the timber. The glass shatters, flame blossoms, and the hall erupts in fire. At once the walls scream, not with the sound of timber cracking, but with the shriek of souls bound too long to stone. The portraits writhe as if their painted forms burn from within. The staircases split, sending embers spiraling into the air. The children scatter, not in terror, but in relief, their forms unraveling into threads of light as fire consumes the hall. The entity thrashes, its shadow form splintering against the ceiling. It roars in 100 voices, fury and anguish entwined. You cannot break the covenant. You are the covenant. But Eleanor does not yield. She races through the burning corridors, pouring oil as she goes, setting flame after flame. Each step leaves a trail of destruction. Each door she opens collapses into fire. The hall bellows like a beast in agony. In the great dining hall, she stands before the long oak table where generations once feasted upon stolen prosperity. Flames lick the portraits, devouring their hollow faces. She cries aloud, her voice hoarse but resolute. Your bargain dies with me. The entity coils around her, choking the air, pressing its weight upon her chest. She cannot breathe. It seeks to crush her, to force surrender. But through the suffocating blackness, she hears the children. Their voices rise, fragile yet strong, no longer whispering but singing, a broken hymn of release. They do not cry for sacrifice now. They cry for freedom. The fire catches the covenant stone. The sigils carved into it glow, searing bright before cracking apart. A fissure runs through its center, splitting it like bone under strain. The shadow writhes, splintering, its countless mouths screaming in rage. "You will burn with us." The flames surge higher. The roof collapses, sending beams crashing into the altar chamber. Eleanor feels heat consume her dress, searing her skin, yet she does not flee. She spreads her arms wide, embracing the inferno, her scream joining the chorus of children now dissolving into light. The entity lunges for her, shadow claws raking across her body. Pain tears through her, blinding, searing. But the children's song swells, piercing the darkness. The shadow falters, its mass unraveling, threads of smoke torn away by fire. Eleanor collapses to her knees, her body consumed by flame. The children surround her one last time. Their faces soften, their hollow eyes glowing with faint light. The boy with the ribbon leans close, whispering in her ear, though his lips barely move. "Thank you, sister." Then they vanish, released at last. Ashford Hall screams one final time as its stone crumbles inward, the roof collapsing, the walls devoured in an inferno. The entity's roar echoes into the night, fading into silence as its form disintegrates in fire. And Eleanor, her body consumed, feels not terror but release. As her vision fades into ash and flame, she clutches her final thought like a prayer. The curse ends here. The fire rages on, visible across the moors, a pyre for centuries of sin. The villagers gather at the ridges, their lanterns trembling in their hands. None speak. They only watch as the legacy of Ashford Hall collapses into ruin, its covenant severed. Or so it seems. The moors fall silent, the smoke climbs into the sky like a funeral shroud. But among the ashes, something stirs. Beneath the charred remains of the covenant stone, a single ember glows, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The final offering has been made. But whether it destroyed the covenant or renewed it remains uncertain. Dawn bled pale across the horizon, a cold grey light stretching over the moors and the skeletal frame of Ashford Hall. Where once stood stone walls and towering chimneys, there now remained only blackened ruins, smoke still curling upward like the last breath of a dying beast. The fire had not merely destroyed a house, it had consumed a legacy, reducing centuries of ambition, blood, and silence into a pile of glowing embers. The villagers crept from their cottages at first light, drawn by the smell of charred oak and scorched earth. They stood at the edge of the estate, unwilling to cross the boundary. Fear and reverence held them back. For generations they had watched the hall with suspicion, whispering of bargains struck in the dark, of sacrifices demanded and children taken. Now, seeing the estate in ruin, they did not rejoice. Instead, they lingered in uneasy silence, as though fearful that the ashes themselves might rise and exact vengeance. No trace of Eleanor Ashford was found among the ruins. Some swore she had perished within, her body consumed by the same flames that devoured her ancestors. Others whispered that she had not died at all, but had walked calmly into the moors as the fire raged behind her, vanishing into the mist like a phantom set free. The truth was uncertain, but one fact was undeniable. The children's cries that had haunted the village for centuries no longer echoed in the wind. The air felt strangely light, as if a suffocating veil had been lifted. Yet, relief did not come without unease. Old beliefs die hard, and the villagers, though spared from the curse's reach, knew the soil beneath their feet was steeped in blood. They spoke in hushed voices of Eleanor's sacrifice, some calling her a martyr who had severed the bond, others warning that the covenant was never so easily undone. In the days that followed, the ruins smoldered, smoke rising like incense to the sky. The villagers avoided the grounds, leaving the estate untouched. Grass and weeds began to creep over the charred stones, swallowing the whole piece by piece, as though the earth itself sought to bury the memory of the Ashfords. And yet, on moonless nights, when the wind fell still and silence reigned across the moors, a few claimed to see her. A woman's figure, wandering the ruins, her outline shimmering in the dark like heat over stone. Some swore her face was not her own, but a shifting visage, half Eleanor, half Isolde. Her presence was neither threatening nor benign, only watchful, a sentinel bound to the ashes, lingering where her bloodline had ended, as though ensuring that no covenant could ever take root again. Children dared each other to sneak close on such nights, but most fled before reaching the crumbling gate. The braver ones described hearing faint whispers, not in anguish but in warning, as though the soil itself remembered. And perhaps it did, for the land bore the sins of centuries. Children buried without graves, names struck from records, and pacts sealed in blood. Fire could destroy stone, but it could not erase memory. The Ashford name was gone from parish rolls and village gossip. No heirs remained to claim inheritance. No portraits survived to hang in galleries. But absence does not equal erasure. In tavern corners and at harvest gatherings, when the air grew heavy and firelight dimmed, the villagers retold the story of the Ashfords. Parents spoke of it as a cautionary tale to their children, a reminder that ambition, when bartered with shadows, demands payment in flesh. And so the ruins became a monument, not of grandeur but of warning. Travelers avoided the moors altogether, unsettled by the sight of charred stone jutting from the earth like broken teeth. Those who lingered too near claimed to hear faint laughter carried on the wind, the sound of children finally released from bondage. Others insisted that the laughter sometimes turned into weeping. The truth of Eleanor's fate remained a mystery. Did she perish willingly, sacrificing herself to free the taken? Did she survive, wandering the moors as an eternal guardian? Or did she, like her ancestor Isolde, defy both fate and blood, choosing exile in realms unseen? The villagers debated endlessly, but none dared search for proof. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved. Yet one truth endured, as immutable as the ashes that stained the soil. Family legacies do not die with their names. They linger in whispers, in blood, in the sins passed down like heirlooms. The Ashfords had sought dominion, but instead had bound themselves to a curse that devoured their children. Eleanor's fire may have ended the covenant, but the stain of what was done remained etched in the land itself, a scar that no rain or season could wash clean. And so the story ended as it began, with a warning, a reminder to those who heard it that the past is never truly buried. Blood remembers. The earth remembers. And in the stillness of night, when the wind carries voices too faint to be the living, one must ask, are these echoes of the dead, or the whispers of sins waiting to be repeated?